I will admit that Star Trek Lower Decks seemed like a wild idea when it was announced. But despite my initial apprehension, I'm so happy to have been quickly proven wrong about a Star Trek comedy show being a bad idea. Of all the Star Trek TV shows, it stands out for its fearless approach to adding to the franchise's dense canon while constantly tapping on the fourth wall. I can comfortably understand why some Trekkies may not enjoy Star Trek Lower Decks, but I am definitely not on their side and haven't been for a long time. The epic Star Trek timeline has been enhanced further by modern efforts. After the divisive ending of Star Trek Enterprise in 2005, the Prime Universe wasn't visited again until the arrival of Star Trek Discovery 12 years later. When the saga returned, it had, perhaps unsurprisingly, undergone the gritty reboot treatment. I wasn't sure at first. And while it's still not my favorite Star Trek show, I've warmed to it a little and have at least accepted that it paved the way for the space opera's comeback. However, Star Trek Lower Decks had a very different role to play. Although Star Trek, the animated series, had been canonized long before Star Trek Lower Decks' announcement, I had never really seen the franchise as anything other than a live-action project. That being said, the thought of another animated Star Trek show still excited me. What caught me off guard was the reveal that Star Trek Lower Decks would be making comedy a priority. I had certainly laughed at certain moments in Star Trek movies and TV shows before, but none of those projects had set out to be anything other than epic sci-fi adventures. The show's zany animation style and offbeat humor initially brought to mind shows like Rick and Morty and Final Space. It felt as though after Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard weren't quite hitting the mark quite how the franchise had expected. Star Trek was selling out in a desperate attempt to attract a new kind of fan base. Thankfully, I went into it with an open mind, and all my worst fears were immediately put to rest, and some of them were even harnessed to great effect. Once I got past the weird fact that everything being said and done in Star Trek Lower Decks was being entered into franchise canon, I realized the show was exactly what the iconic saga needed. Not only was the story set in the long-neglected 24th century, but it was clear it was written as a love letter to the franchise's golden era. The endless string of references and Easter eggs concerning other Star Trek projects established it as a show that was for seasoned Trekkies rather than newcomers. Despite Lower Decks' continuous nods to classic Star Trek episodes, it does also work as a self-contained narrative. The new characters are often very easy to root for, and the creative adventures on which they embark routinely achieve far more in the show's 20-minute sitcom format than other Star Trek spin-offs achieve in an hour or more. The chaotically fast pacing has a huge number of advantages, and I've already noticed loads of new things when rewatching the show that I missed the first time around. Although I'm devastated that Star Trek Lower Decks is now over after its fifth and final season, I'm also really glad that it happened at all. It gave the franchise a much-needed nudge away from the dark and dreary formula that was being favored by shows like Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard. While those two shows certainly have their merits, Star Trek Lower Decks serves as a constant reminder that the franchise can always try something new and work incredibly well. Going forward, Star Trek shows and movies shouldn't get too tied up in making a project that always takes itself too seriously. Many of the best Star Trek stories certainly boast an insane amount of drama, but Lower Decks proves that comedy can easily be the priority while maintaining that signature Star Trek vibe. Hopefully, Star Trek's future takes a lot from Star Trek, Lower Deck's immense success, and doesn't just cast it off as lightning in a bottle, never to be replicated.